Hello, everybody. Welcome to Starfleet Tactical. I am Chris Weave, as usual, and this is Buddy, who's always here somewhere when I'm doing this. Buddy's all of a sudden decided that the food dish over on the side is more important than Starfleet Tactical. And, of course, we also have Pat Doyle, who's looking quite dapper today, wearing a shirt with a collar, and you look like you're actually dressing to go to work or something.
Yeah, well, I was on a Zoom call all day, and the requirement was business casual. I just haven't had time to change.
So that actually leads to an interesting question. When you're working in the simulator, are you wearing like your uniform?
No. Just business casual in the simulator and stuff like that. Yeah, no big deal.
Okay.
So, the only people that end up wearing a uniform are the ones that are probably catching a flight as soon as the simulator event is done. And it's easier to get through security if you're an employee in uniform than if you're in normal clothes. So,
yeah, it makes sense. So, yeah, my brother's making a comment that I have a collar on my shirt, which I frequently have a collar on my shirt on the show, because I either wear a shirt that has a T-shirt that has some logo or some saying on it or something, or I wear a shirt with a collar. This particular shirt, if you look real carefully, you'll see it says Swift Shore. No, I'm trying to remember how many guns this ship had. It's a 74, Swift Shore 74. This I got for the close action Trafalgar game celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Trafalgar. This was a war game we played that had 60-some players in it. We weren't quite at the level of one player per ship, which was actually probably a good thing. Because if we had one player per ship, the players at the far end of the line never got engaged. So, and I'm trying to remember, did we talk about this on the air? All right, Pat, we lost.
We have.
Okay.
We
have. Okay, well then I won't do it again. That'll tell you about what my life is like. All Zoom calls, all sitting in front of the computer looks the same. And I remembered having this conversation, but I couldn't remember who I had it with. So. Okay. So how'd your week go, Pat?
Week was good. No major issues. Just went to work, came home, worked on Navy stuff, worked on normal work stuff, kept the house clean, retrieved my kid from Brazil, and that's been about it.
Did your wife come back too?
Sort of. She's in the United States. She is in Virginia taking care of our grand dog. Our daughter had to travel, so she is taking care of our daughter's dog in Virginia for a couple of days, and she'll be home a couple days from now.
Okay, so she's in Virginia Beach?
Yeah. Yep.
So
playing with her friends.
Yeah, Virginia Beach is very, very nice at some parts of the year, but not necessarily this part.
Well, it's generally considered. See, she's transitioning slowly from Brazil, Virginia Beach, and then she'll make it up here to Minnesota. So she's easing back into winter.
Okay. Where's she from originally?
Cincinnati, Ohio. Not too far from you.
Yeah. Okay, so she's an hour away from me. Okay. Well, then she's used. She grew up with winter.
Yeah, but not Minnesota winter. I've lived in Cincinnati before. It's not really what I consider winter.
Yeah, when all the rest of you guys, so like my parents in Iowa were dealing with 5 below, and my brother was dealing with 5 below, with wind chill like 15 or 20 below, and you were talking about very similar stuff. And my friend in Omaha was, if anything, in Omaha they had a little bit worse than that. And I think the coldest it got here was about 5 above. And that was like noticeable because it only happened 1 or 2 nights. And most of the time it was like around 15.
Yeah.
So still, still cold.
Yeah.
But
weather's back up into the 30s and 40s right now. It's like springtime already.
When I moved from Iowa to DC, I was there for 10 years before I owned something that I considered to be a winter coat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I used to tell the locals, we have a word in Iowa for what you guys call winter. We call it fall.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so we were going to talk about do a question and answer session today. So anybody who's got questions about, doesn't have to be Star Trek, it can be the Honorverse, it can be other science fiction, it can be whatever you guys want. Just put them in and we will try to do our best to capture them and answer them. And I just realized I should probably grab some scratch paper, which in this case is an envelope that I'm not going to use to send a bill back because I do all that online, but they conveniently send me scratch paper each month. So, okay, so I'm looking through the list of comments to see if we've got anything that looks like a question so far. And I'm not seeing any questions, guys.
Okay. Oh, had someone live in.
Okay, I was looking at Facebook and there hasn't been any news there about David Weber. Have you and Bu9 heard anything new? Yeah, David's doing fine. So David, as many of you know, David got COVID. He ended up in the hospital. He never actually got put on a ventilator, but apparently that I got the impression that maybe they were even talking about it at one point, but they didn't ever put him on a ventilator. He's home. He's doing pretty good. But, you know, David's like around 70 and he's sometimes forget that he's not the Superman that he used to be. And so we always encourage David to like take it a little bit slower than he's used to. Like he's discovered the hard way that he can't like just work, you know, pull 4 all-nighters in a row to finish a book anymore. He just can't do that. So let's see. Wright had a question about asking if Larry Bond could join, and I will do that. So I know that my friend Chris Carlson, our friend Chris Carlson, made some comment to Larry about joining us because this had been asked once before, and Larry's response was, oh, you know, I don't know enough about Star Trek to really talk about Star Trek. And I haven't yet had a chance to go back to Larry and say, no, Larry, they don't really care about what you think about Star Trek. They want to talk to you about things like Hunt for October and all the other stuff that you do. Because, you know, Larry was a naval officer for a while. He did some, he was a surface warfare officer, and then he ended up leaving the Navy. He got involved in war. He had always been involved with wargaming. He got more opportunity to do wargaming when he was a naval officer assigned to the Center for Naval Analysis, but way before I worked there. But Lieutenant Larry Bond was one of the officers assigned to CNA, because it used to be the case that CNA had a handful of naval officers who were assigned to provide operator expertise, because you've got a bunch of PhD mathematicians and physicists, et cetera, that are doing studies for the Navy. But it's nice to be able to walk down the hall, walk into somebody's office and say, hey, I got this question about how P3s do their thing. Or I've got this question about, you know, you as a submariner, how would you do X or whatever? And they could bring those people in to be subject matter experts. And so Larry had that job at one point. And so Larry got plugged into with all the people at CNA because young Lieutenant Bond was there at CNA. And so I met Larry. I believe I originally met Larry at the Origins Wargaming Convention, I think. I know I met Chris Carlson there. And that's also where I met Mark Herman, and that's also where I met Peter Perla. So Mark and I have never actually worked on a project together, but we've ended up wargaming together and know a bunch of people. He was in the business for a while. Peter Perla ended up being my boss. Chris Carlson ended up working for me when he was a reservist and hiring me to be his replacement when he was getting ready to take early retirement. And so my last job was basically, people introduced me for a good solid 2 years as this is the new Chris Carlson. And Larry and Chris are going to publish a game that I'm putting together. It's an effort that I was part of when I was at CNA. It's a game about the World War I naval arms race. And so Larry and Chris really want to publish it. And so when I get done running the War Game conference that I'm running in April, then the next big rock on my schedule is to do that. And in addition to that, our own Pat Doyle and Chris Carlson are looking at the feasibility of doing something in the Honorverse. So, which is really funny because Tom Pope always said that what he wanted to do was Harpoon in the Honorverse, and now we're seriously looking at something that might be Harpoon in the Honorverse. So now there's all sorts of issues that have to be taken care of. That is not me promising you that we're going to publish Harpoon in the Honorverse, right? Everybody we've talked to, including the people that have gaming rights, have said that'd be really cool. We would encourage you. So. What order should you read the Honorverse in? That's actually a really good question. And Pat, if you've got any thoughts on this one, certainly jump in. But I would actually recommend there's two things you need to do. The first thing is you need to decide if you're going to read, if you want to read the main core books only, or you want to read the subsidiary stuff, and which parts of it do you want to read? Because you've got the main core that's Honor Harrington, and then you've got a couple of little spin-offs that are like 2 or 3 books that are generally taking place at the same time, but are other characters. And they go off and they do their sort of thing and all of that. And some of it is sort of like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. So there's guys that are minor characters in the main series that it's like, we're going to go off and investigate this problem. And then they go off and they investigate the problem for 2 books. And then they come back and say, we've investigated the problem and here's the report. And so if you don't want to read about them investigating the problem, you can just read the report. But if you want to read all that stuff, then you can read all that stuff. Personally, I'm a completist and it's all fantastic. And so I would recommend that you read them in the order that they were published. Because David, by and large, with the exception of like the Travis books and the Stephanie Harrington books, which take place in the distant past, pretty much everything else was written in order that it occurred, with the exception being that there's some stuff that occurred at the same time. Like there's one of the books that David wrote a book that was like, I forget, what was it, Pat? 10,000 pages long, something like that. It was too big to publish, and Bain said, like, yeah, we physically can't publish a book that's that big. So he took all the parts that took place in another part of the galaxy and split those out and turned them into its own book. And then so you've got the Honor Harrington piece and you've got the other piece, but they take place at the same time and they were published almost exactly at the same time. If you want to read the entire story in order, just read them in their publication order. Some of the short stories are excerpts that when he cut stuff out at the end, remember last time he said that he always cut 10 to 15% out. Some of that stuff then got turned into short stories. And so like I remember on one of them I'm reading it going, this sounds really familiar, and it's like, yeah, I read the 3-page version in the main book and now I'm reading the 30-page version. And Pat, over to you.
Okay, so yeah, I've detected several other questions as we've gone through. However, what order should you read the books? Yeah, I think from the beginning. So here's what I'll say though. The first 4 or 5 books is Honor Harrington in command of a single ship and has a crew and that kind of thing. And the show and the stories in a fairly small scope. as they progress, the scope of the books gets larger and larger, and it's like reading the Winds of War. Like, you're having the leaders of all these star nations involved in the plotting and scheming amongst everything, all the stuff that's going on. So the books tend to get a little longer and larger in scale as they go. So I happen to have started somewhere in the middle of the series, just happened to pick up one of the books because nobody writes book number 1 of this series on the books. You just have to figure it out somehow usually. So anyways, so it was pretty good. So that is that. Delon asked something about with Voyager coming back from the Delta Quadrant, could they have used the Bajoran wormhole? The Bajoran wormhole went to the Gamma Quadrant, so whole different section. I guess if they had known where it spit out in Dominion territory, they probably would have died. They probably would have been intercepted by the Dominion and destroyed. So I'm going to guess no.
As it turns out, there's a YouTube video on this exact topic. And I believe the answer is that it might have cut some time off. But, like, you got to go into Dominion space. It's like, well, I'm in a part of space that kind of has some bad guys in it. And it's got the Borg, so it's got some bad guys that I occasionally run into. And in order to get away from them, I'm going to go into a place that I know really sucks.
Then again, it's entirely possible Janeway would have wiped out the Dominion single-handedly like she did to the Borg. So, it's a 50-50 shot. Yeah,
that's a good point. That's a good point. So, but in any event, Delon, if you go look online, there is a video that talks about it. As far as your other question about quadrants of the galaxy, I believe that there's mapping in the Star Trek universe is an exercise fraught with peril. Because there's no real serious canon source. What you've got are sources, some of which are almost canon, but I don't think any of of which that's probably the closest to being canon in that it's not on-screen canon, right? So it's affiliated material. It's what they would call beta canon. And it has a map in it, but the thing is, first of all, there's lots of different things. There's lots of different things that have maps and they don't agree with each other. And they're all two-dimensional. And you can sort of get away with two-dimensional when you're playing a tactical game, but when you're trying to figure out how all these things fit next to each other, the two-dimensional part, I would argue, really, really seriously distorts everything.
So one of the other questions, and I'm still pondering this one, so I don't have an answer yet. I'm still trying to go through my head. But what's the most interesting space combat tactic seen in fiction? So I don't have an answer yet. I'm still trying to find the most interesting. But if I'll think of an interesting one before we get done, and we'll address it.
That's a hard one, and I feel like I should have a whole bunch of them that just kind of pop out. So it also depends upon what you mean by interesting.
Well, interesting to you.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
it's interesting to somebody else.
Because it sort of gets into it. Sometimes it'll get into the question of why it's interesting. There's a tactic in the Exordium universe called the Katie wheel, named after the St. Catherine's wheel, which is a fireworks, right? So it's one of those fireworks that spins around. And so the idea is the space drive, you've got the real space drive that you've got. Basically, it's not technically inertialess, but it's hardcore gravity manipulation such that you can do maneuvers that should leave you just a paste on the inside of your spacecraft, right? And so the tactic is you start spinning around very, very fast in a circle. And then you have the computer set up so that you then when you do your jump, in your 5-skip jump, when you come out on the other side, so basically you've got a planet in between you and the other guy, and you're jumping off to one side where you've got a shot at him. When you come out of this, you're already slewing around, and your computer automatically fires the main weapon. The BFG in this is something called a skip missile. So basically the idea is that you can come out from behind cover and get a shot off so fast that the other guy doesn't have a chance to respond. And in this particular case, they knew where the weakness in the shield was, and so they were doing it in such a way that they could get a weakness in the shield. And that was a clever thing. That was a clever thing. Same series had one where they're going through a system that had a bunch of junk in it. It had a lot of dust and stuff, and it would limit your speed in real space. And this is something that you could see in the Honor Harrington universe, but I've never seen them do it. So what they did is they used their tractor beams to grab an asteroid and use it as a shield, so they could go through all the muck faster without having to worry about with them running into all the dust and debris that was in this system. There were some other things about it that prevented them from just cranking up their shields like they would normally. And so that strikes me as the sort of tactic that you could use in Star Trek. It's the sort of tactic that you could use in the Honorverse and stuff, but I've never seen it used in any of those places. So Pat's thinking about other tactics, but those are the ones that come immediately to my mind. What are the ranges for grazers? To be honest, I don't remember. I'm probably not the guy to ask. I would recommend. So there's a publication that's put out by the Royal Manticore Navy that if you're a member of that, you can get it for free. It's the Honorverse Compendium that's done by BU9 member Mark Guttis, and it pulls together. It's basically a reference work that sort of pulls all that stuff together. That's probably where I would go to look it up. In fact, maybe I will go do that in just a second. I'm also not positive that the range for grazers stayed the same over the course of the series, although I kind of think it mostly did. Most of the increase in range of all the different weapons during the Honorverse was missiles. But I'll see if I can find that. Let's see. Okay.
So there was a question about just recently, just a moment ago, about how do you figure out what's the best thing for determining what is canon? What's the preferred source material? So most of the time, obviously, it's the TV show itself, because if it happens in the show, you generally consider it to be, that's what happened. However, they do occasionally make special effects errors, and some of those get admitted to eventually, and so you can ignore that. Like my favorite one in Star Trek, my favorite error was the episode Darmok, where they fire phasers out the photon torpedo tube. So I always chalk that up. Though when they remastered The Next Generation, they did fix that. So I thought that was very big of them to do that. And so anyways, the TV show primarily, however, things like the Star Trek technical manual, written by people like Sternbach and Okuda, definitely got to give that a lot of weight. And from there, from there, I guess there's probably some of the beta canon, some of the published stuff, which is probably decent up until the point that it gets contradicted by the show later on, and then some measure of common sense. I don't consider any one source to be absolutely sacred, because every now and then there's a writer makes a mistake, or the show makes a mistake, or something like that too. So that's generally it. If somebody, someone like Sternbach or Okuda wrote up something or an article explaining some detail or something like that, then I generally certainly give that a lot of weight at that point. So the DS9 technical manual, the information about the ships in there was generally considered to be wrong, and was admitted to, I guess, later on by some of the people that put it together. So as far as the ship data and everything, because there's some cases where you compare two ships and they have the identical dimensions. They're totally different shapes, but they have the identical dimensions. So clearly there was a mistake in there. So that's that. That's it for that one. And then anyways, there was that other question that just popped up about talking about the development of the Klingon Navy. Yeah, I think that one could be interesting, because also you can, I suppose, compare the trajectories of technology levels between Starfleet and the Klingon Empire. When they start off, the Klingon Empire is here, but there was that episode in Enterprise where the Klingon that is with Archer is lamenting the fact that everybody just wants to be a Klingon warrior, and sort of the warrior crowd is sort of taken over the Empire, to the point that, so you can imagine that it's more cool to be swinging a bat'leth than being a scientist, and can't really be a spacefaring society without having some level of intelligence. And they do point out, it's a very diverse, very diverse civilization. It's not just warriors. It's just, those are the ones we always run into in Star Trek, because they're the other people out in spaceships. So clearly they had to have some smart people to invent warp drive and do all of this stuff.
In a lot of ways, the Imperial Klingon Navy and the Imperial Japanese Navy are very similar. Because one of the recurring issues with, in the U.S. Navy, if you were really, really smart, they would make you like a radar operator, because radar was hot shit stuff and you need smart people to run it. And so it was technical. And so they sort of focused in on, giving technical jobs to smart people. In the Imperial Japanese Navy, if you were a radar operator, it generally meant that they didn't think that you were good enough to be like a regular line officer.
It was more honorable to be on the bridge of the ship, shouting commands or loading a gun or something like that. But radar is what gave you situational awareness, which situational awareness is what allows you to make decisions. Being able to make decisions faster than your opponents, what allows you to win. So.
Yeah. So that's the other thing I think is sort of interesting about the Romulans and the Klingons is that I get the distinct impression that, in the time of Kirk, the Klingons had a technological edge over the Romulans. By the time you get around to the end of Deep Space Nine, I think the opposite's probably true. Yeah.
Well, and, they also point out the Dax in season 7 points out, I think the Empire is dying. The Klingon Empire is dying and should let it die. They don't uphold any of their traditional values or anything like that. And then, you kind of get, it seems like a society in decline, actually, kind of beginning with Archer in Archer's time. They're still a very powerful force to be reckoned with, of course, but they seem to be a society that's in decline all the way through Deep Space Nine. And I am sure that they are crippled after the war. So, and actually we kind of get to see it also, the fact that the Klingons, they'll use the same ship for 150 years. That doesn't give you the impression that there's a lot of innovation going on. The other book that I could recommend, if you can get this Klingon Bird of Prey Owner's Manual, it's written by Rick Sternbach and Ben Robinson. But they talk about the design process of the ships and stuff like that. And, it's pretty interesting. So it's also a good book if you want to get some insights into the Klingon Navy.
Let's see. I'm looking through this.
So there was another question, Honorverse question, that you might be able to answer, Chris. It was, are there sensors? Can they? Yeah, that was it.
So the transits are so fast that you basically discover that something's there when it pops in. I think I want to say that there's a line in there somewhere that says that nobody's ever been able to successfully measure the speed of a transit. But I could be wrong about that. But it takes place really, really fast. And so there really isn't a way to tell what's coming through. And, you may recall that there's that one scene, and I don't remember which book it's in, but there's a scene where they get the word that Basilisk is being attacked, and Whitehaven is at San Martino, and he sends the message to the control guys at the Manticore Junction saying, "I'm coming through, and I'm coming through hot." I think we talked about this a couple of sessions ago. Mm-hmm. But, he needed to send the note that I'm coming through and I'm coming through hot, and you need to clear all the traffic, because there was no other way for them to know that it was coming. So maybe you might be able to get like hey, there's something coming and it's big. But, they, at an absolute maximum, it's the equivalent of what you see in Babylon 5, which is jump point forming, and it's a big one, and then something pops out.
So Scott Martin Gavin, he says in the original series, the Romulan ships didn't have warp drives, so they traded their cloaking technology to the Klingons for Klingon ships and the knowledge to build warp drives. So here's the thing. I believe, even though that the Enterprise in Balance of Terror couldn't detect that the Romulan bird of prey had warp drive, clearly they had to have some faster. It's probably not a tactically useful warp drive, but clearly they had faster than light travel. Otherwise, that bird of prey's mission would have been, 40-year round trip mission or something like that. If they had to travel sublight all the way to the system, and multiple outposts were attacked along the Federation border within a short period of time, which, unless they had, one outpost every several hundred miles along the multiple light years long border, would mean that that Romulan ship had to have had some warp drive to hit multiple outposts along the way. Since we know their detection ranges, exceeds, something past a light year in general in Star Trek. So yeah, they clearly had to have some form of faster than light travel. I know in one of the games, they basically said they just couldn't fight at warp. It wasn't tactically useful. So that was how they kind of got around that a little bit. But who knows? It was a quantum singularity drive or something like that.
This is actually, I've made the comment before that there isn't one Star Trek canon. There isn't one Star Trek. There's actually several Star Treks, and they're not even internally. There's basically a Star Trek for every show that's ever been done, and then there's one for every game universe that's ever been done, and then there's the Sternbach Okuda stuff on top of it. And that's even without getting into the semi-canon or non-canon sources like Mastercom Data Center and stuff like that. When you sort of add all that stuff up, you can really just kind of pick the one that you like and make that argument, sort of build your universe from there. In my head canon, it's Sternbach Okuda all the way.
If you do... Yeah, and if you do a game, then you've got to make the thing internally consistent.
Yeah, because you can maybe make the excuse that, well, the writers did that because it would make a good drama, but you can't do a game like that. It falls apart very quick, because any game you do is going to get play tested more in the first month after it was sold than it did in the entire time that you did it. if it has any sort of sales whatsoever. And it's going to be a different group of people who are going to approach it differently. And it's almost guaranteed that at some point they're going to come back and said, did you know that if you do X, Y, and Z, this happens? And it's like, oh shit, no, I didn't know that. So it's very easy to break games, and the games that are easiest to break, this is one of the reasons why Starfleet Battles is so good at what it does. That's what you're looking for. That's what it does. Starfleet Battles, the tactics and the development of everything in Starfleet Battles starts with a small number of assumptions and is generated internally by the game design. So it's not like you saw with Traveler, where they had space-going carriers and they had battleships, and they kept trying to come up with reasons as to why you would do both. And it's not like BattleTech that shipped with a set of mechs that I don't know anybody who played BattleTech more than twice that decided that Shadowhawk and Phoenix Hawk were the way to go. Right? They all wanted to play something else because these were these jack of all trades, master of none type mechs that the game system does not reward. It doesn't reward them at all. But it's what they came up with, because when they first came up with it, they thought it made sense. And so let's see, there's a question about inviting David Gerald or David Weber onto the show. So I know David Weber way better than I know David Gerald, although I have been on panels with David Gerald, and I did get a chance to tell him about how, he is, among other things, in addition to being the author of The Trouble with Tribbles, he then went and was a writer on, like the head writer, I think, on Land of the Lost, the Saturday morning TV show. And so David Gerald is the creator of the Slee Stacks. And so I got to tell him about the time when I was in college and my roommate had a program on the local radio station, the alternative rock station at the University of Iowa, which had a transmitter that covered most of campus. And he had the like 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. on Tuesday slot. And it's like, hey, do you guys want to come down to the station and see how the radio show works? And it's like, hey, yeah, that's great. So we go down to the station and are there at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And he says, do you want to be on the radio? And so a couple of my other roommates and we got on the radio with Jerry, and we pretended to be a Yugoslavian farm punk band called Dead Slee Stack. We picked Dead Slee Stack because that was just something that at one point somebody had said, what's that smell? It smells like, and one of my roommates just piped up Dead Slee Stack for some reason. To this day, he doesn't know why. And so I got a chance to tell David Gerald the story about how I was once the lead singer in a band called Dead Slee Stack. Anybody who's heard me sing
probably sounds like a dying Slee Stack.
Yeah, I mean, Dead Slee Stack is probably the right answer. I'm reminded, one of my professors in grad school said, I like to drink scotch and sing songs, and my friends like to listen to me drink scotch. So yeah, that's a possibility. We'll have to see about that. Let's see. I'm scrolling.
Anybody ever counted how many times the original series, the crew of the Enterprise forgot they had shuttlecraft? So obviously there was the one where Kirk got split in half. I'm not sure how many times they forgot it, but talking about shuttlecraft, I have determined that it's my opinion that shuttlecraft are the most dangerous form of transportation ever devised by mankind. They crash those things more often than, than anything. How many shuttle flights have we seen in the show, and what percentage of them crashed? Something like 60%. That's a bad failure rate.
So this is one of the...
Their pilot training is just horrific.
this is one of those times where I really, really wish that that the Star Trek the magazine was still around, because they used to do articles on things like that. There was an article on what the fatality rate of wearing a red shirt was in the original series, and they went through every episode that had red shirts that were killed. You know, how many red shirts did we see over the course of the series, and how many of them died? And I think the answer was 17 were killed over the course of 70 some episodes. And so they were able to, and which ones had names and which ones didn't, and all the rest of it.
Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Ensign Ricky beamed down to a planet.
Yeah. Have you seen the meme where Kirk is saying, "Dig 3 graves up there, I'll tell you why later"?
No, I don't recall that one. That's good. That's good.
I'll have to find that for you.
The Star Wars speeders used on Endor may be more hazardous than Star Trek. Yeah, but they were shooting at each other in Endor and trying to kill each other. The shuttles crash with very little provocation beyond that. So, but don't get me wrong, flying around at 200 knots on a little bike that you're not strapped into, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a pretty dangerous form of transportation.
Well, this is a universe where nobody's ever heard of a guardrail.
Well, right.
I mean, there is no equivalent of OSHA in this universe. The number of times where we just, it's like, oh, how deep is that? Oh, that falls about 4 miles. Guardrail? Nah. Why bother with that? So somebody asks if David kind of left Michelle Hinkey storyline hanging. Do we know if David is going to do more books about that branch of the story? I think actually I saw the cover for one about on David's Facebook page, if I remember correctly, about a week or so ago. So I think there's one more book there that it's basically Michelle Hinkey showing up at Mesa saying, we're here for the alignment, and all the people left are going like, what are you talking about? We don't know about any Mason alignment. What on earth are you talking about? So I believe that's in the works, but I haven't read it yet. I haven't seen the draft myself. And so I don't know, but I know that there's at least, I was a little surprised. I'd forgotten that there was a piece. I still haven't read the last of the mainline books either. I just haven't gotten to it yet because I want to start and reread the entire series. So I lost lock on the fact that there's a piece that he hadn't resolved just yet. So, so there was Rob Davidoff talks about the Travis Long books set in the Honorverse about 400 years earlier, which are done in collaboration with Tom Pope from Bu 9 and Timothy Zahn. So basically, Tom ends up writing about 50, 60,000 words for those novels, and none of those words actually make it into the novel, but he does all the background stuff and sort of explains how the pieces fit together, et cetera, et cetera. So Tom sort of functions as like the left hemisphere of Tim Zahn's brain for understanding how all that stuff works, and then David owns a piece of it, and it all works pretty good. So there's currently there's 3 books out. The 4th book has had a long gestation because David keeps doing things like falling down and breaking a wrist, which he did a couple of years ago, and being told by his doctor that he's totally and completely exhausted and he needs to stay home, and then getting COVID and his wife having back surgery a couple of times and all the rest of it. So the process has gone a little bit slower than was intended. But the plan is that there's at least 2 more books. It's going to be at least 2 trilogies worth of books by the time they finish. So there's more Travis coming. And, eventually that's the time period. The time period we're talking about here is the time period where Manticore discovers the wormhole function. And so it's really sort of Manticore goes from being this sleepy backwater to being like the potential of, it's like they just discovered gold in California. I wonder if this is going to have an impact. And the answer is yes, it is. So
I noticed someone just said he pulled out the rules for the old FASA game. So yeah, this was fun. I used to play this in about 7th and 8th grade, I think. I really liked this at the time. So it was always kind of a fun little game. Quick and simple.
The single best move I ever did in a war game, I did playing that game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And if I'd had a little bit better die roll, he wouldn't have killed me the next turn.
Yeah.
But
did you hit the brakes, hoping he'd fly right by?
We were playing at double blind at Origins with some guys that they had headsets, and they brought their computers, and they had developed programs so that they could talk to each other back and forth on the headset. And because it's a headset, the players in that room couldn't hear what the players on the other side had done. So we're playing it double blind. So you had to have like sensor line of sight. You had to have line of sight in order to see people. And I was able to, through a couple of turns worth of orchestration, set things up so it looked like I was coming around the planet this way, but instead I was able to do a hard turn and come around this way. And so the other guy came around, we're sort of going in parallel with like Jupiter here, and he's going to come around and get me from the front. And I was able to get around and get him from him back. And we were playing the game with intentionally underpowered ships. So I knew that he couldn't. You basically got to pick 2 shield facings to energize. And so he's coming around in front. He's going to energize his front shield facing. So I came around from behind and shot him. But I had to immediately turn away because his buddy was coming down. I mean, if it almost worked. I almost killed the first guy. I did kill the second guy, but the first guy turned around and got a shot off in my rear and killed me. Meanwhile, the idiot on my side that had the Excelsior got declared the winner of that game because he had an undamaged ship left, because, of course, he never engaged.
Yep. Let's see.
Yeah, that was frustrating, but it was really cool. I mean, after I got destroyed, I went into the other room, and when they said, "Oh yeah, this is the guy who pulled that maneuver," they clapped. Because I spent like 2 or 3 turns setting up that. I had to get the speed just right to have enough movement points to make the turn and come around behind him and catch him unawares. So,
yeah, the mighty hood goes down scenario. I see someone just brought that one up. That was always just a fun problem to try to solve. I'm not even sure. Maybe we played it once or twice. Oh no, actually, I played the mighty hood goes down. It was my very first tournament that I played, and so the way this particular tournament worked is whichever player playing the hood survived the longest won as the hood player, and then and I managed to survive as the longest. Trying to remember. So mostly the tactics I used was in the scenario was a little different than the one published in Starfleet Battles. But in this particular one, you had to stay within a certain distance of a center point. And I just did the geometry to buy myself the most time. But I never actually armed my weapons. So I stayed as defensive and evasive as I could and just made myself the hardest possible target. And then I think at the very end, I ended up taking a shot at somebody right before I died, but managed to come up with a way to live longer than anybody else. The opponent was trying to capture me. That's right. And I made sure I made sure we didn't get captured. So if you pull out any old captain's log from like number 42 on, if you're a Starfleet Battles player, it's got the game tournaments that I played for the first several Federation Commander games. So if you pull those out, the Victory at Origins articles are written up in there. So there might be some tactics from Federation Commander games that you might find interesting there.
So somebody said that I need to study up on the Martian Congressional Republic Navy. Yeah, I need to read The Expanse. I've watched a couple of seasons of the TV show, and I need to go back and rewatch them, and I need to read it. I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah.
In part because I know that I'm going to do them all, and I know that this is one of those wait until the guy finishes the series, and then you can read it all at once. Incidentally, that was kind of my plan with the Honorverse. I'm sorry, what?
The book series is pretty much done, I believe. I don't know that they've come out with any new ones. I think.
Yeah, I think you may be right about that. It may be time. I kind of planned on at least letting David Weber get a couple out with the Honorverse, but as I've told people, I'm going to wait for him to get 2 or 3 out. Next thing I know, there are 50 books in the series and a new one being published every 6 weeks. So it took a while to get caught up, but. Let's see. There was a question about tactically useful FTL drives, setting that Rob was saying that where some of the fighters have a fast cycle, short range FTL. That sounds kind of like it was the Star Carrier series by Bill Keith, who was writing as Ian Douglas for that. And because it's interesting in that series, you've got, or were those? No, those weren't FTL. Those were high acceleration, slower than light. But you had different drives for the small ships and the big ships, because there was sort of like one drive only worked if one drive was very big and massive and gave you a certain set of capabilities, and the other drive was much smaller and gave you a different set of capabilities, but didn't scale well. And so you ended up with fighters being somewhat different. And so that's an interesting series. There's some things about it I like, and there's some things about it I don't like. I had a chance to discuss it with Bill at the Confluence Science Fiction Convention. I had suggested to the panel, to the con people, I said, hey, I got this great idea. Why don't we have a panel, a coffee clatch? So this is a small group session limited to like 10 or 12 people, right? Why don't we have this a thing where we can bill it as, the author of Star Carrier talks with an honest-to-goodness naval analyst about his stuff. But I'll only do this if Bill is okay with this. Well, as I find out later, they never asked Bill if he was okay with it. They just scheduled it. And Bill's reaction when he saw this description and then he was on it, it's like, oh shit, this is the last thing in the world I want to do. Because he was afraid that I was going to come in and rip his stuff apart. And it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. But Bill was in the Navy in the Vietnam era, but he was a corpsman. He wasn't a warfighter per se. And that was a long time ago. And he did his one tour and got out. And so he wasn't necessarily the guy to talk to about naval tactics, but it was a lot of fun. He's a good guy, and he's written a lot of stuff over the years under a lot of different pseudonyms, and almost single-handedly created the Traveler universe. Like he and his brother Andrew did like all of the Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society in the early years. They had to write a bunch of stuff under pseudonyms because they didn't want it to be all one, 2 people writing all the articles. Some people detected the similarities between the different articles and used the same sort of techniques that they use to analyze books of the Bible to try to figure out which books are written by the same guys, and that people use to try to figure out, did Shakespeare write all the Shakespeare plays? And they did a study and concluded that, like, yeah, this is like 2 guys writing under a bunch of pseudonyms. Okay, let's see. Let's go through.
So Phil Banks points out there's one more book to come for The Expanse called Leviathan Falls.
Okay, that sounds right.
I'm looking at my Audible account, and it appears my son has used up all of my credits.
He uses all your credits. He steals your microphone.
He eats my food. Yeah, takes up bandwidth in the house. I don't know what to do. Needs to get a job.
Any thoughts on why the Federation fights a war, learns to make warships, wins the war, then proceeds to forget the value of having warships on standby for the future? I think the short answer to that is...
Isn't that how things work?
I'm sorry, what?
Isn't that just how things work?
Yeah, part of it is maybe they're not so advanced after all. Maybe they're just like us. The other part I would say is most of the time they can make that work because it's not like they're not totally unarmed, right? If you look at anything that's classified as an explorer, there's for an exploration ship, the Galaxy class has a lot of phasers.
Yeah.
And a lot of shielding.
Well, yeah, the Galaxy class is essentially a battleship. It gets referred to as a battleship a couple times. So
you're not really narrowing it down. Okay. Is that a book or is that a game? Because that's sounding an awful lot like the game Web and Starship by Greg Kostikian that was published by West End Games and almost got remade with a Kickstarter, where you had something that kind of looked like that. I don't know of a novel that's set up that way.
Yeah, that does not ring a bell for me.
Book. That's not ringing a bell for me. It's not ringing a bell for me. Yeah, Rob Davidoff makes a comment about Klingons assassinating people and stuff like that. The Klingons undergo a complete and total personality change between the original series and the time period of Next Gen. They really they sort of swapped the personalities of the Klingons and the Romulans.
Mm-hmm.
They go from the Klingons are the ones you can't trust, but the Romulans are an honorable people, to the Klingon sense of honor, and the Romulans are the backbiting ones you can't trust.
Yeah, I think, but you get the hint from Balance of Terror that, or at least it sort of my headcanon is that you have people like who was the guy that was kind of the sniveling guy. The commander gets warned that he has powerful friends and stuff like that. So in my mind, the Mark Leonard's character sort of represents the old guard that's sort of on their way out by the younger, sleazier types and stuff like that. So, but
that could be.
We have hit 10 p.m.
Yeah, so let's do one more. If we can find one, although I think I'm trying to see if there's a question that we've missed that I'm trying to remember if in any of the short stories we see an instance where a tree cat has met a Terran cat. And I can't point to one, but there's this little voice in my head telling me that we have seen what happens when this happens. But I don't know. So
yeah, I'm in the Central Time Zone, not the Eastern Time Zone. So yes, when I say approaching 10 o'clock, I mean it's 11 o'clock for the rest of you on the East Coast, and
Yes.
and any number of times, depending on which time zone, how many time zones are represented here. So, all right.
So one last thing, Scott Martin Gavin says Bill Keith is Ian Douglas. I have a cousin named Bill Keith. Wonder if it's the same Bill Keith. If your cousin Bill Keith is the guy who's written like 100 novels, then yes. So, all
right. As always, thanks, Alyssa, for taking good care of us on the show. And let's see. I think
that's about it. I didn't get a chance to go through the transcript from last week and respond to any questions, etc., and post them. I'm going to try to do that this week, and I'll try to sweep up any questions that we didn't get a chance to answer that are buried in the transcript when I do it for this week's show. So if I have a productive day tomorrow, it might even be as soon as tomorrow, but actually probably won't be. I've got a couple of other things I need to work on. So
all right, sounds good. Well, everybody, have a good night. Thanks for sharing the hour with us. Really appreciate it, and we will see you all next week. Take care, everybody.